Welcome back to the Julian J. Franco Show, a show where I bring to you people who I find to be truly genuine, not only in front of the camera, but more importantly, behind the scenes. And now we have today with us Daniel. And Daniel, he has a really layered background, right? It depends on the day of the week that you ask him, hey, how was your day? Sometimes it's a bit more rigid than others. And I was just talking to him before we hit record. He's just somebody who's really intellectual, and it's going to be a fun interview with him because he's going to be able to answer things and articulate things in a way that's going to allow for us to resonate with them. So Daniel, thank you so very much for coming on the Julian J. Franco Show. And I just want to start it with that. You're at, let's say, one of these nice theaters on Broadway, and before the play begins, you run into a few friends and they go, hey, introduce yourself to Jessica and James, and they go, hey man, hey Daniel, what do you do? What are you about? What are you going to tell them?
I'll say, ask me at intermission because the show's about to start and I'll run out of time. I will probably, if I was meeting people at a Broadway. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Julian. It's great to see you, and I hope I can live up to the hype. If I was meeting people in a Broadway context, I would probably first mention that I write musical theater. It's something that's, a labor of love. I've been doing it for over 15 years now. I got my M.F.A. at NYU in that. Not something I ever thought I would do, but something I love to do. So I write music and lyrics. You can see there's a piano and a guitar behind me. I write on those instruments. I write music and lyrics. I'm a huge fan of lyrics of all kinds. I have a YouTube program called Lyrics to Go where I nerd out about lyrics from Wu-Tang Clan to Joni Mitchell to Bjork to Stephen Sondheim, everything. So that's one side of me, the artist, songwriter, all that. Now, that's not the most lucrative profession. They say you can make a killing on Broadway, but you can't make a living. And I've never even made it to Broadway with any of my stuff yet. So got to have other things in the can. Most recently, I'm an author. I co-authored this book, The Myth of Normal, with my father, Gabor Maté. It's a book, well, the subtitle is Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. So it's looking at our culture from the perspective of how well or not well does it meet our basic human needs, and how does that explain a lot of the health crises, both physical and mental, because mind and body can't be separated, that we're seeing increasingly. So a lot of these so-called mysterious rises in cancer, autoimmune disease, suicidality, mental illness, addiction, they're not really mysterious if you connect the dots. And it's a critique of Western medicine because Western medicine is expert at unconnecting the dots, treating the human body as a series of separate organs and systems as opposed to a whole person, a whole self, a whole life. Biology and biography are connected. So it's hitting on a lot of things at once, and it's really struck a chord. The book's been on the New York Times bestseller list. By this point, I would hope that the person I'm introducing myself to would be rolling their eyes like, my God, this guy's really full of himself. But since this is an interview, I'll give you the full biography. The book's been doing great. I'm the voice of the audiobook, I've narrated all my dad's books plus other audiobooks as well, and that book is doing also very well on the lists. So that's the side of me. And then my dad and I also lead a workshop together called Hello Again about adult parent-child relationships. The day we're recording this, I'll be flying to my hometown of Vancouver in a few days to lead it with him this weekend, and we'll be writing a book about that in the coming year or two, plus doing a podcast about it, we hope. And then I think the last thing I would say is I am what I call a mental chiropractor, and I'm the world's only mental chiropractor because I made it up. It's this modality that is basically, it's an expression of me. It's an expression of everything I've ever learned that was useful to me on the personal development, personal healing, personal discovery path. And I've been on that path my entire adult life, and probably earlier than that too, kind of by necessity, because there were a lot of struggles and difficulties and questions and dissatisfactions. And so trying a lot of different things, and gotten to the point where I can kind of distill it down. And what I do with people is I take walks with them. My service is called walkwithdaniel.com. People sign up, and if they're in the same city as me, we walk together, but normally they're all over the world. So we walk by phone or Zoom audio, and they bring a specific situation in their life, a place where they're stuck. So it's got to be a specific thing. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I don't deal with big capital I issues. So if someone comes to me and says, I have mommy issues, I'll say, okay, go see a therapist for 3 years. And I'm not slagging therapy. I'm in therapy. It's important. You know, you need that patient, open listening, that non-goal oriented approach to healing. But what I'm dealing with is people who are really sick of something. Like there's a particular situation that's just like a pebble in their shoe and they can't get the laces untied. And I help them get the laces untied. And if we have to, we cut the shoe off. um, that's why I call it mental chiropractic. Like a chiropractor would adjust your back, wouldn't spend a lot of time just massaging around the edges. We get in there and make an adjustment at your request if you're the client, right? So I get to be really direct, and it gives me license to talk really straight to people, to ask them really pointed questions, because my goal is not to open up some kind of long-term process. I'm not trying to see you next week if you come see me. It's like in the next 75 or 100 minutes, we're going to get you unstuck. Okay, now how much intention does that take? What kind of conversation happens when you set the context and the stakes like that? It's a whole different frame immediately, because now you're not just like, I'll think about it, or it's not intellectual, it's not abstract. It's like, now is the time, let's get it on. So I love that. That plays to my strengths. And that is something I'm doing increasingly. And I would like to write a book about that as well. So I've got a lot of different things on the go. It's a very, I got to say, I couldn't have said this a year ago or even 6 months ago, but right now it's a very full and satisfying life.
Well, Daniel, that is beautiful, and I cannot wait just for your podcast, because you're excellent again at articulating. When I was just listening to your prior interviews and your guest appearances, how you just talk about you help people get into alignment,
Yeah.
with that, and I just really believe that what you're doing is really important and really critical. Now, just a fun question is, you've been on so much media lately
Mm-hmm.
speaking about this book. Is there anything that you kind of are tired of answering, like to a point where you're like, oh crap, they're gonna ask me this? What's something that you found you're tired of answering, number one, and number two, what's something that you wish more people would emphasize during the interviews with you?
That is a great question. Two great questions in one. I wouldn't say I'm really sick of anything. It's all new for me. I've never had a platform like this before. My dad's been, writing books for 20 years and being interviewed all kinds of places. This is new for me. So I'm just kind of enjoying every opportunity to speak to people. And even if the questions are similar in different interviews, the person who's asking them is different. The vibe is different. Like you're unique, right? So it's automatically a different experience. I'd say the questions that where I feel like I'm sort of doing a job, and it's not a bad job to be doing. I'm promoting my book, right? My dad, well, see, because it's my dad's book and I'm the co-pilot on this one. The next book, it'll be 50-50. But these are his ideas. And I was brought aboard I'm like the pinch hitter or the pinch runner or the pinch everything, like to make sure the thing happens, and also to make it tighter and brighter and lighter. Like this is heavy stuff. And I wanted to make the prose more lyrical. I wanted people to like be able to read this book, no matter what their education level, no matter where they're at in society, no matter what their politics are, and like put it down after a paragraph and be like bars, like I wanted to have that oomph, that impact, which as a lyricist is part of my stock and trade. You want the things, especially in musical theater, a person only gets one chance to hear it. It happens. You can't rewind. It's happening live in front of you. So I wanted the book to draw people forward in terms of the quality of the writing. So all of that to say, promoting the book is not a bad thing. That said, when people ask me to like break down the topics in the book, I find myself sometimes repeating my dad's talking points, because he's done a million interviews. He's been on Rogan. He's been on Tim Ferriss. He's doing much more media than I am, and traveling like a devil. The guy's 78 years old. I don't know how he does it. So sometimes I feel like I'm kind of repeating talking points, and that's fine. Like I'm perfectly happy to do it. And I try to find new ways of saying it. But at the same time, I'm more at home when I'm talking about things that are closer to my own heart. So when I'm talking about like cancer and autoimmune disease, well, I'm not a doctor, you know. And these colleagues that are interviewed in the book are my dad's colleagues. They're not mine. But still, it's, you know, there are far worse jobs out there than repping a book like this, because I believe in it. I totally believe in it. Is there something people I wish would ask more? People have been asking great questions. I mean, I did have someone ask me about lyrics in an Instagram live recently, and she was asking me about my favorite lyrics about mental health, and I just found myself, I think I'd forgotten how much I love talking about that stuff. Like, I'm just such an enthusiast about it all. Like, forget expertise and anything like that. Like, I am intelligent and articulate, and I can sound smart about a lot of things. That's kind of what I do, and it's a gift and a curse. I've been doing it since I was a kid, and it can be a way of hiding, actually, sometimes. You know, it can be a way of appearing in control or trying to impress people. But if I get too carried away with it, I can get disconnected from what really matters to me. Now, everything I've talked about so far does matter to me. But if you were to ask me what's really at my core, it would be things like this piano over here or that guitar, and then lyrics. You know, we could talk about, like, you know, on my YouTube channel, Lyrics to Go, I've got a 10-part video series with my friend Deshaun, who's a Brooklyn-born guy. And I'm from Canada, but we both love the Wu-Tang Clan. And we did a 10-part series on each video is the different Wu-Tang rapper and our favorite verses by that guy. So we have a Capadonna episode, we have a Ghostface episode, we have an ODB episode. Now, I could just do that forever and be perfectly content. And it's not healing work, and it's not helping people with their trauma and anything like that. All of which I'm really happy to do. And I love, actually, the mental chiropractic work with people. I truly do. But I love just unapologetically, unreservedly, the stuff that is mine and mine alone. With the other stuff, there is overlap with my father's work, and that's just my karma. That's my path. That's a cool thing I get to do in life, is to sort of collaborate with him and develop my own iterations of his thing, and just my own version of wanting to help people, because I didn't choose to go into medicine. But yeah, any chance I get to just talk about culture or talk about songs, music, lyrics, things like that is a time where I really, something in me really lifts off and feels very, very light and excited. So I'd say that. But all of that to say, there are no bad questions. There are no boring questions. And it's just for me to keep in mind, like, what proportion of these things creates an aligned balance in my life, because I enjoy them all. But if I don't pay attention to making sure the right proportion of ingredients are in it, you know, the cake won't rise, so to speak.
I understand that. And you say that maybe 6 months to a year ago, you wouldn't have been able to say, you know, my days are really fulfilling. What was missing from that cake? What ingredient were you not, you know, instilling in your daily routine that caused that?
Well, I would say it was balance. Like, throughout the writing of the book, we were just writing it. It was just a Microsoft Word document, and emails flung back and forth between my dad and I, and arguments over this word or that word or this chapter title or this order. You know, it was just a long ass school project, you know, like, you know, an essay, which I love writing, but it wasn't real to me as a book. But now it's this physical thing. It's out there in the world. You know, 6 months ago or so, I was deep in musical theater work. But that's all I was doing. And I knew it was coming to an end, because it's very seasonal work. You have a project, you get actors in a room for a week, you develop a show, and then you move on. You probably don't touch the show again for another year or whatever. And that happened. So from January through May, I was super busy. I just moved back here to New York, and was gung-ho. And then it all ended, and a relationship I was in ended. And I've just lost a lot of steam, and I got depressed the way I've often gotten depressed in my adult life. Plus, the book was coming out soon, and I wasn't looking forward to it, because, again, I wasn't confident in myself that I had the core of, like, the knowledge of self, I guess you could say, and the grounding and the structural integrity in my life to be able to balance it. I was worried it would just either take over or that I'd just be ignored and it'd be my dad's thing. Like, the story of my life. I'm getting too much attention. I'm not getting enough attention. I'm getting the wrong kind of attention, blah, blah, blah. This ego stuff, insecurity stuff. A year ago, I was living, well, I guess a little over a year ago, I was living in Mexico, just kind of riding out the COVID times, not doing much except the YouTube channel, which was fun. But again, all my eggs were in one basket. But I think overall, it's also there's just a turning of the page, and I don't want to get too prematurely victorious here because pride comes before a fall. But I do feel like with the release of this book and a musical theater spring coming up, I've got a show being done in Philly that I'm excited about that I'll be down there working on regularly, and the mental chiropractic thing working. I've got these things starting to have some momentum of their own. And yeah, people want to talk to me. It's cool to be invited on podcasts. It's cool that people want to hear what I have to say and find value in the way I phrase things like that. I'm not going to lie. It actually fortifies something in me. And I know there's sort of a spiritual, cliche that we're supposed to, don't rely on validation from the outside. And that's fair enough. Don't rely on it, but I'm not going to front like it's not cool. Like, I love it. It's a feeling of accomplishment. Never mind success. It's a feeling of accomplishing something and connecting with people. And I'm just enjoying it. I'm grateful for it. And, if it was to end next month, then so be it. I'd have to fill my life with other things. So yeah, I would say that. And then the final pieces that have never been in place for me, but I'm starting to put in now, which I actually think are going to support me a lot, no matter what happens in my external work and personal life, which have always dominated my life, is health and home. So this place behind me I'm in the process of setting up. So that wall there is going to have a couch next to it in a few days. That's my first couch that I've ever owned. And that piano there is the first piano I've ever owned. And this is my first ever 1-bedroom apartment. And like at age 47, I feel like I'm laying the foundations for a life that can support all the things I love to do. And similarly with health, like I'm taking on my nutrition right now, changing my diet after I got some blood test results that weren't that super. So, my mom was saying to me the other day, she's like, I don't know why you haven't done this sooner. Like, because, I've been carrying extra weight and whatever. And she says, I can't stand carrying extra weight. I said, yeah, Mom, I never had a reason to do it. I wasn't inspired enough by my life, the totality of my life, for something inside me to say, wait a minute, fuck, I want to be there for this. I want to show up fully, and I don't want to be burned out by it. I want to be able to bite off as much as I can chew in this life. And it's just not aligned. Again, it's not aligned to not have a home I can return to rest. It's not aligned to not be eating consciously, to have mood swings and all this kind of stuff. So all of a sudden, rather than like beating myself over the head with like shoulds in the abstract, all of a sudden it's a no-brainer. It's just not aligned to not take care of that stuff, which for me is a big breakthrough. And it's aligned with how I work with people in mental chiropractic. Rather than tinkering with the content when you're stuck, look at the context. What's the container inside which you're looking at the problem? I don't solve problems. I try to dissolve them. And so in this case, it just took a bigger, better, more satisfying, more fulsomely self-expressive life to give me a damn good reason to take care of business at home.
So I find interesting. I didn't know that the audiobook was by you. If I knew that, I probably would have got it sooner. So like that, I can just hear your tonality and how you express yourself, because I think it's a perfect marriage. There's some people who read their own books and you're like, okay, shoot me now. I cannot go another chapter. So when you were actually just reading all the text that you guys put through this whole school project, what stood out for you that when you had to vocalize it, it made it a bit more important to you?
The stories in the book, the personal stories of healing and of tribulation. There are some incredible stories of suffering in this book, whether it's the story of, Indigenous Canadian people, which is that's our term for first Native Americans, right? First Nations or Indigenous. Just the multi-generational trauma and addiction and mental illness that have just run rampant through those communities. Of course, nothing to do with genetics, everything to do with life experience and cultural memory. also stories of African Americans and but people of every persuasion, every background, um, women who have come through incredible hardship, sexual abuse in childhood, including some very famous women. The woman formerly known as Eve Ensler, who now goes by the name V. She changed her name because she didn't want to have the same last name as the father who serially raped her as a kid. As part of her healing, just tells an incredible story of her breast cancer and all kinds of multiple complications. Um, the stories people tell about just the way that Western medicine has jerked them around. The book is not anti-Western medicine, but it's a critique of the way Western medicine does business and its limitations, the way it's more of a religion than a science, that it's got all these blind spots and it refuses to look at the actual science, which says that mind and body can't be separated and that biology and biography can't be separated either. But it tries to treat us like we're just, you know, lab animals or just experimental organisms in a lab. So yeah, but the humanity, the human stories, and then the stories of healing too. What people have discovered about themselves and the effect that had on their health in many cases.
And this is something that I feel it's ongoing, but I'm just really excited how this book is being so well received.
Mm,
Why do you think people are latching on and going, come on, guys, give us more. I
yeah.
love this. Keep explaining it. We're going to ask you the same questions we've been asking forever now. Does trauma from childhood really affect the way I show up as an adult?
Hmm.
Are all adults' problems really stemming from, their environment when they
Hmm.
were, in childhood? We've been answering and asking that back and forth, back and forth. What's different this time around with you two?
Well, so again, he's been answering them back and forth. This is my first rodeo. Um, People are hungrier for it. If this book had come out before COVID, it might have done well, but it wouldn't have charted, I don't think, at least not right away. Um, People, we've just been through a really traumatic experience in our culture where it's been driven home to us, first of all, how connected we need to be, the cost of disconnection. For many people, inequalities have become even starker. Um, and just the limitations, even the limitations of technology. Zoom is a wonderful thing, but it can't it can't make up for the alienation we have from each other, from our families, from our work, from ourselves, from nature. So I think people are hungrier for it. I think people have seen the limitations of Western medicine a lot more. I think the current political climate that we're in, where things have the bottom has fallen out, people distrust institutions, left and right, and just really sense that so many unspoken assumptions that we were just inherited, we just ambiently absorbed by being born in this culture are just maybe not true because they don't seem to explain things. And I think people ask the same questions over and over again for a few reasons. When people are asking them, these things are of personal importance. People really, everyone is, I think, much more aware that they're carrying things. And many people are trying to sort it out. And many people are at different places along the path. One of the things I really wanted this book to do, and I'm glad that it has, is to connect with people who aren't necessarily already in the new age spiritual healing world. Like, as I put it, Dad, I said, I want this book to be for everybody, not just people who are already on the trauma train, in your cult. Not that he is a cult leader, but he had a cult following. And many, some of these people were already very aware they're carrying trauma and they've been working on it and they describe themselves that way. Many people don't. They just know that something's off. And we wanted to present a view of trauma that was a lot more accessible, not so mystified. So I think, yeah, there's just been a groundswell, maybe a critical mass of people who can admit, hey, you know, the typical established grooves aren't doing it for us and for me and for the people. At this point, everyone knows someone dealing with serious addiction. Everyone knows someone or knows someone who knows someone who's killed themselves. Mental illness is in every family. Autoimmune disease is everywhere. 50% of US adults are on at least one chronic medication. So we can't pretend anymore like normal is healthy. It's like we're all seeing the glitches in the matrix. You can't fool all the people all the time. And, we're all at different stages of being Neo, like being like, huh, like that's weird. And then there's this red pill you can take. So that's one thing. And I think the reason people ask the questions over and over again is that when it comes to debunking myths, foundational myths of the culture, you have to hear it many times and many ways because it's so ingrained. It's like, when Galileo suggested that the earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around, people were so upset by it that they wanted to kill him. Maybe they did. Yeah, I think he was killed for that. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. But anyway, the fact is it's counterintuitive when your intuition has been co-opted by technology, so to speak, and the propaganda system that keeps our systems in place. So we're it's like a political radical like Noam Chomsky, right? He has to say the same things over and over again when talking about, say, US foreign policy or economic injustice, because it so goes against the grain of what this society teaches people about what America is in the world. But actually, he's presenting things that are just facts and that actually explain why the world is the way it is. So we're doing the same. And I think people are both hungry for that, and they can only take in a little at a time, maybe, and they need to hear it multiple times because it's, we're just one fire hose up against tidal waves of indoctrination and just received so-called wisdom, just normalized myths. It's not even like there's a conspiracy. It's just, addiction is a sort of a moral failing or a set of bad choices, or addiction is a brain disease. These things, whichever one you subscribe to, they're both myths. There's no proof for either of them. And the first one is insane and cruel and doesn't help people get well. If we say, no, actually, addiction is a coping strategy designed to kill pain. And where does the pain come from? Early childhood wounding. Well, if you actually think about it and let it into your heart, it makes the perfect sense in the world. But you have to let things into our hearts, and that also takes time, because the kind of intelligence that this book is trying to awaken in people is more than just an intellectual smarty pants kind of knowledge, but actually connecting the dots for themselves so we can see the world differently, so we can act in it more effectively and live wholer and more connected lives.
Excellent. And Daniel, what would you say are some of the traits of a toxic society, or society that, that isn't just conducive to good health? Like what are things that we have to look for? Because you can say that, and the average listener right now or viewer just go, what? I don't buy into this world is toxic. You are either toxic or you're not, is what you make of it.
Right. Well, so we have to define what we mean by the word toxic. So toxic has taken on pop culture, pop psychology meanings. I mean, hell, it's a Britney Spears song, right? And in that song, it's kind of cool and sexy to be toxic or whatever. I don't know if I've really listened to the lyrics that closely. I don't know if they stand up to close scrutiny, but it's it's a
the
bop.
Taste of your lips. I'm on it.
Right.
I
I can't get enough. Right.
Yeah.
And then we talk about toxic energy, kick toxic people in your life to the curb. Don't put up with that stuff. That's fine. That's all fine. But and then we can think of toxins as like, physical poisons, lead paint, asbestos, air pollution, bad water, all that. Okay. The phrase in our title is not toxic society, but toxic culture. And we use the phrase culture, the term culture, for a reason. In a laboratory, if we were biologists and we were trying to grow bacteria or organisms, we would raise them in a certain biochemical broth, like a little soup of a certain pH levels, temperature, different chemical composition, or whatever will be best suited to promote the growth of those organisms in a petri dish, right? And we would call that a culture. If you look on the back of a yogurt container, see live active cultures. And you would assume that if you have the appropriate culture for those organisms, you're going to see those organisms thrive. They're going to be doing fine. They're going to reproduce. They're going to live long, healthy lives, at least by bacterial standards. If, however, you started seeing those organisms dying off at unprecedented rates, or getting sick, or mutated, or attacking each other, or whatever, you would either decide that there's been some kind of terrible genetic mutation, which wouldn't make any sense in a short period of time, or that it's a toxic culture. It's just not suited to the development of that particular organism. So the organism is acting out in ways that are aberrations from its nature. Now, we human beings are very adaptable. We can live in the North Pole. We can live in the Sahara Desert. We can live on mountains. We can live on beaches. We can live in wartime. We can live in peacetime. We can live in feast. We can live in famine, at least to a certain degree. We have a wide range of environments in which we can adapt. That doesn't mean we're at our best in all of them. And so that's where we're coming from. So what we're saying is that this culture both fails to provide for some of the essential needs that human beings have, and it actively damages or is hostile to some of our needs. So wounding happens through commission when bad things happen to us as kids, and omission when good, necessary things don't. So to start then from what's toxic about this culture, we'd have to start from the culture's guiding assumptions about what a human being is. Because any culture is going to build itself around a concept of what is a human being. Now, if you take an economics course or a political science course, one of the first things you're going to read is what? Like Adam Smith or Thomas Hobbes. Life is nasty, brutish, and short. We are competitive, acquisitive beings trying to maximize our personal self-interest, our profit, minimize our losses. It's, survival of the fittest, which is attributed to Darwin, even though he never said it. It's a bastardization of what he actually said about evolution. Well, how convenient that that's our concept of human nature, because that justifies the system that we have. The cash rules everything around me system. But what if that's not true about human beings? Again, we can live that way. And you could say that there are certain advantages to it, like it brings out innovation, sure, creativity. Some people rise to the top. There can be something inspiring about it. We're not talking about morally right or wrong. But look at what else it's brought. Colossal industrial damage to the planet, terrible inequality, misery for many, many people, and a lot of illness right now. Well, it turns out that that's not the only way of looking at human beings and human nature. And in fact, if you take it in the context of our entire species evolution, most of our ancestors would think we're insane because they had a very different understanding. They lived in small band hunter-gatherer groups up until very recently, relatively speaking. If human evolution were measured in an hour on a clock, we've only been living in like civilization, agriculture, and then cities and all this stuff for like 5 minutes. The rest of the times we were living in these communal groups that moved together, following where the food supply was, following the weather. They had to rely on each other. There was no self-interest without the interest of the group. Even more than like each one teach one. It's like each one make it possible for the other one to thrive. Like we were a collective species. That's how we came up, basically. That's how we became. That's how our brains and our DNA, all of it is encoded in there, which means we need each other. We need each other, which means we need a space where we can be supple and vulnerable, where we can receive. We need give and take. As children, we need unconditional love and support. We need to be surrounded by, a village. It takes a village, as we often say. I don't know how much we apply it. We need unstressed parents who have the ability to care for us and pay attention to us. We need free play with people our own age under the supervision of mature adults who are holding the space for the culture. We need culture that is time tested and time honored and that's passed down vertically from generation to generation. Now, I could just stop right there. I could say many other things that we need, but just ask yourself, how well does this culture provide those things? And in what ways does this culture actively discourage them in the name of whatever profit? So take culture. Well, culture is completely horizontal now. One generation can't understand what the next generation is talking about. And it's like every 5 years, there's a new sub-generation. And that's, of course, the corporate world completely supports that, because you get to sell a whole new product line and a whole new set of slang and a whole new, and parents are more and more disconnected from their kids, not because they don't love their kids, but because they're too stressed. And their work, people have to hold down 2-3 jobs in many parts of our society to even be able to put food on the table for the kids, never mind having the time to really sit with them and play with them and be with them. So they hand them an iPad. What else are you going to do? It's not their fault, but it does have consequences. So in other words, what we're looking at is a culture that, if you wanted to set up a culture to frustrate human needs and promote ill health, you couldn't do a better job. Not saying it's a conspiracy, there's no like medical Illuminati sitting in a back room, like deciding how it's going to go, but there might as well be. And then there's the ways in which our scientific prejudices really are toxic to human needs, because again, this separation of mind and body, which is just completely bogus. But again, it suits a patriarchal scientific establishment that wants to see itself as the experts on everything, and reality is objective and we can understand everything purely scientifically and not have to deal with the human, the emotional, the spiritual. It wants to break everything into just behavior and observable empirical measurements. Well, that is, to use the word very, very literally, that's a spiritually retarded approach. It's actually quite defective as an outlook. It's very, very wanting, and it's very limited, and it's very inaccurate.
Continue.
Well, I guess the last thing that's worth saying, because it's at the core of the book, a healthy culture would encourage people to become themselves. So it would first provide the foundations for secure attachment. That is, healthy, undisturbed, unconditional, unassailable love and connection. And if the parents die, then the uncle's an answer there, or the grandparents, or the village. It would catch the kid no matter what's happening. There would be no cracks to slip through. The fact that kids slip through the cracks, well, why are there such cracks? So that's number one. But the purpose of that ultimately wouldn't just be to have happy kids. It would be to raise healthy adults, because that's the foundation for becoming who we're supposed to be: authenticity. A healthy culture gives people a compass, a map, a mythic framework, and I mean myth in the positive sense, right? A way of understanding the world and understanding themselves, rites of passage, real customs, real cultural traditions that allow us to fully become who we are, access our deepest gifts and give them back to the world, become elders, and then die well, so that other people can see us die well and that they can continue, because that's just how it goes. As one of my favorite authors, Stephen Jenkinson, says, death is not the opposite of life. Death is the underwriter of life. Something has to die in order for life to happen. And so we also live in a death phobic culture. We live in a culture that doesn't know what to do with death. So we make horror movies out of it, or we push it away into nursing homes. Anyway, now I'm going off on a tangent. But the point is that we would become our full selves, right? But in a culture where parents are too stressed to fully accept their kids for who they are, to fully be there, kids get a mixed message. The parents say, "I love you." But then when the kid gets angry or hurt or upset or like out of control or distressed or vulnerable in some way, there's going to come a moment where those parents, despite their best intentions, are going to communicate the message: you're not acceptable when you're like that. Don't be like that. Change your behavior. And again, no fault of the parents, no lack of love. It's stress. It's stress, and it's bad parental education. There's so many so-called parenting experts out there advocating timeouts and hitting kids and all this other stuff, which is strictly designed towards behavior modification. But that's not what growth is. What you're teaching a kid when you just try to make their behavior the most important thing is that you don't matter. The way you behave matters. So you better hide who you are, shape up, and act right, but never mind being connected with yourself. So what happens now? When I get angry, I don't even feel it. I just push it down so I can be acceptable. I become a nice person. I become a helping person. And then 40 years later, I have multiple sclerosis or I have cancer. Not saying that's the only cause, but it is statistically very, very correlated. And there's all kinds of physiological pathways by which that happens because the immune system and the emotional system are one. There's no, if you push down your anger, you're pushing down your body's ability to keep out the bad stuff. We teach people to be conformists, to not ask questions. We teach people to overload themselves with stress and consider that a point of pride. Grind set is one thing, but like driving yourself into the ground to prove how strong you are and how resilient you are. And we raise to high positions of power some of the most traumatized, even psychotic people in our culture. And we have this paired example in our politics chapter, because the book goes all the way to the political level, from the cellular to the political. On the one hand, you got Donald Trump, a compulsive liar who learned to lie in a childhood terrorized by a tyrannical father. He has a brother who drank himself to death. Donald didn't go that route. He became a blustery faker, just and a user and a blowhard, and he doesn't know the truth from fiction, because as a kid he had to be able to make things up on the spot to survive this, to insulate himself from reality. He had to live in his own world, and now he does, and half the country loves him for it, and half the country wishes he would go away and never come back. Then you got Hillary Clinton, Ms. Resilient, Miss Girl Boss, right? Miss Persistent and all that. Well, there she is on the campaign trail in 2016, and she gets pneumonia. And what does she do? She hides it. She keeps campaigning until she collapses on the street and then says, "I feel great. It's a beautiful day in New York." She was not feeling great. Where did she learn that? She learned that in a childhood where her mother literally said to her one day, "There's no room for cowards in this house. Go back outside and you deal with those bullies. You figure out how to deal with them." The girl was 4 years old, and she's being told that her tears, her vulnerability makes her a coward. Now, in a sane society, that mother would be like brought into a big circle, and like there'd be a drum ceremony or something, or they would do something to clear that bad energy, because that's just loco. But this is not only tolerated and accepted, it's first invisibilized, and then it's turned into virtue. Now Hillary Clinton is who all women should aspire to be. So we create a culture that then extols these toxic qualities, like being separated from oneself, like putting everybody else's needs before your own, or conversely, in the case of people like Trump, steamrolling other people's needs. People learn they don't learn how to say no, and they forget that there's even a no to be said, which means they can't say a healthy yes to who they really are. Because as my dad likes to say, and this is one of his better phrases, I'll give him credit for this one: without a healthy no, your yeses don't mean anything. Which is why kids learn to say no long before they learn to say yes.
Daniel, that right there rung the bell, rung the alarm. The volcano has erupted. This is one thing that I struggle with too. It's you don't even know that it's possible to say no.
Right.
Now,
of course,
if we can weave these two things in, and you can just make this, like you have been with everything you've been saying is so tangible. It's so easily digestible. It's no conspiracy, no this, no that. It's like, dude, everything you're saying makes sense. Oh crap, grass is green. Oh snap, the sun, if you look at it too long, is gonna burn your eyes. Whoa. And maybe I've been living in a culture that isn't conducive to me finding my true self, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's almost funny when I say my true self or my authentic self, it almost sounds so cheesy.
I
Like,
know.
ooh, let me
I
not
know,
say that
right?
again, because
I
it's almost going to
hate
devalue.
it. I kind of hate it, but it gets at something. So what's your question, so I can actually
Yeah. So my question to you, and I'm just so thankful for all the walks that you've done with these individuals because you've seen so many different perspective experiences, but the common denominator is always kind of the same. So
Sure.
it's great for me to talk to somebody who's been practicing. You've been
Mm,
practicing.
yeah.
So for those who don't know that no is an option, for those who are quote unquote, uh, Dr. Leaf, she talks about people pleasing.
Hmm.
Why do people go into that world of people pleasing, and what's a way out for them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I've indicated, I've pointed the way to why people do it. In the world of trauma, um, the greatest trauma experts will talk about basically the four F's, the options we have to us when we're under stress: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So fighting is, if I can fight you, I'll fight you. Now, obviously, a little child can't; they're not big enough. Flight, they can't flee; they need to be home. They can't survive on their own. Freeze, that's very common. The body shuts down, the nervous system shuts down, we suppress our emotions, we have a shame reaction, so our parasympathetic nervous system kind of collapses, the shoulders hunch in, we protect our viscera, our guts sort of collapse in on ourselves, and we just kind of turtle. Then there's fawning, which is making peace with the person who's causing you the threat. So we become people pleasers. And the combination of the freeze and the fawn, I think. So we don't feel our own emotions, and then we put our attention on how can we mollify, appease, assuage, negotiate, bargain, whatever, with the people we desperately need for survival. But what that means is we're being recruited into a job that's just way too stressful. We shouldn't be having to work that hard as kids, and so many of us do. I certainly did. And I was a kid who could fight. I could fight with words, and I fought my parents with words, but even that was too taxing. Like that took a big that took a toll on me, because I didn't want to be fighting my parents, but that was my go-to. So in terms of people pleasing, yeah, it's a learned coping mechanism. It's the best available option out of really no options. Like that's the only choice for some kids, which means they have to push their own emotions out of awareness, because if I get angry, that's dangerous. So rather than having my parents punish me for getting angry, I instill my own internal police force to keep me in line. And that's called guilt. And that's called shame. And what's interesting is those things were actually there to help you as a kid. Because again, it's your little reminder. Reminder, Julian, it's not going to go well for you if you get mad. Stuff that down. And guilt is, if that anger is starting to rise, the guilt will smack you down hard. And it seems like an enemy. But as we say in the healing section of our book, and that's the second part of your question, and fortunately, it's the third part of our subtitle, the book would not be very much fun if we didn't leave you with any healing information or guidance. All of these inner foes, even our mental illnesses, our addictions, we can turn it around and start to see them as misguided helpers, or as my dad calls them, stupid friends, which is sort of a joke. But they came along to try and save us in the first place. Addiction, it's there for pain relief. It's there for connection. It's there for warmth. The addiction's not the problem. The addiction was a solution to a problem. So the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. Same thing with mental illnesses. I write in the book in my own voice in one little section about how my own semi sort of mild bipolar tendency is a total outgrowth of the childhood I had. There's a coping mechanism. It's not genetic. I wasn't born with it. I was born sensitive, which meant I felt things more acutely, which means my brain had to, react stronger to it. So that's sort of a clue to the healing thing. Number one, recognizing that there's pain is number one. Just admitting, geez, I don't know how to say no. Oof. That's having negative consequences in my life. You got to take an inventory. Where is that having negative consequences? There's an exercise in the book where, suggesting that people write down each week, where did I not say no, where there was a no to be said? Maybe someone wanted something from me that I didn't really feel I could give, but I just went along to get along. A lot of women have to suppress their discomfort at male coworkers or whatever, like invading their personal space. and they have good reasons to do so, survival wise, again, because of the way of our society is set up, but it has a cost on the body. So getting people to be more in touch with the impact of these inauthenticities is a way to encourage authenticity. To go back to what you said about authenticity being kind of a corny cliche, it can become that, especially when capitalism gets its hand on it. Now Instagram is going to sell you authenticity or realness or whatever. You remember when Keep It Real came along in hip hop, how quickly that just became a meaningless pose, right? Wasn't really about, as De La Soul said in 1996, you try keeping it real, but you should try keeping it right. You know? But on the healing path, I think noticing where we're inauthentic is a way of waking authenticity up. Authenticity is not some end state. It's not a product. It's not some parallel universe version of ourselves. I actually have a song that I wrote called Parallel Universe Me, where in the end, the character basically says no to this alternate version of himself he's been trying to live as for his whole life. Authenticity is a dynamic. It's an energy. It arises in us in moments where we realize, oh, I wasn't being myself. And in that moment, who's noticing that I wasn't being myself? Myself. There's a part of me that notices. It's watching the whole thing. I just have to get more and more comfortable with it, used to it, and identified with it, and disidentified, unsubscribed, if you will, from the version of me that I've had to be and that I thought I was in order to survive. So that's, I think, that healing is not a destination, it's a direction. It's not a point on a map, it's a line, or it's even just an area to be explored. And it takes, if you start with the intention, I want to live a wholer life, healing ultimately just means moving towards wholeness. That's it. So don't mystify it. Don't turn it into some big woo-woo, there's my authentic self and this and that. You know it when you taste it. And you can tell when someone's performing authenticity. You can tell. And when someone's just being themselves, it's appealing. You want to be around that. Or you don't. But you can't mess with it. Like, that's just them. So yeah, I mean, the book is full of other, like, so much else that I can't get into in the time we have, but I think it's about learning to be compassionate with yourself, learning to be curious about yourself, learning to find out that you were wrong without making yourself wrong for being wrong. To quote a very different lyric from the theme song to Beauty and the Beast, what is it? I forget the exact words, but it's like beautiful and strange, learning you can change, finding you were wrong, or something like that. Like, what a beautiful idea that, like, finding out that your ideas about yourself, your limited ideas, were in fact incorrect is the best bad news you can find out.
Right. Because you know what to look for. So Daniel, one thing is knowing that you were wrong without making yourself wrong.
Yeah.
So this,
I like that. I'm gonna have to remember that one. I've never said that before. But
I'll send it to you. Don't worry, and I'll make a quote so you'll have it.
Send me the T-shirt.
Oh, I got you, and the hat. Now, the last question before we wrap up and let you go, for people who are dealing with regret, right? Because they made the decisions that they've made when they were still in this premature state, so to speak. How do you, when I go to walkwithdaniel.com and then I meet up with you, we're in Central Park and I'm like, dude, this is what I'm going through. And I regret these choices, and guilt and shame continue to walk with me.
Yeah.
What do you tell that person?
Well, I'd say, what's your intention?
To be free of that.
Okay. To be free of that. Well, first of all, I wouldn't let you get away with to be free of that.
Right.
Because the minute you say, right, just to be free, period. How about being free with that? Can you change what happened? No. Can you change the fact that as a human being, you feel remorse and regret? No. It'll come and go of its own accord. Are you controlling it? Do you wake up in the morning and saying, yeah, today I think from 1 to 4 p.m., I'm going to beat myself up, call myself a piece of shit, and tell myself I'm hopeless, and then I'll have dinner and then go see a movie? No, this stuff happens automatically. And again, that's coming from parts of you that are from a long time ago. This is not the first time you feel guilty or ashamed. It's not about what you think it's about. Now, healthy remorse, it's a good thing. That's a human thing. We wouldn't want to live in a world where people didn't feel healthy remorse, but healthy remorse, just like healthy grief and healthy anger, has a a time frame. It's there to move us along. It's like a conveyor belt to get us from one spot to another. So grief takes us from the moment of shock of someone or something very important to us going out of our lives, conveys us to the point where we can say, okay, new reality, that person's gone, and they really mattered to me, and I'm going to take all the best stuff from that, but we have to move through all those feelings. Remorse is like that. I did something that does not accord with my values. Now, but that also assumes you had a choice. Now, at a certain point, you want to live a life of responsibility. And there are times when I've ignored a gut feeling and I've done something and I didn't intend to hurt someone else, but it did. And it's healthy to say, you know what? That really doesn't sit well with me. I don't want to do that again. But if I really don't want to do it again, guilt and shame are not going to help me not do it again. It's just going to help me push myself down and then make an angry resolution. I'm never going to do that again. And then some other part of me is going to rebel and be like, okay, I'll show you. Like we stay split from ourselves, as opposed to, wow, okay, I used to not see that as a problem, so I couldn't have chosen otherwise. Theoretically, I could have, but that's what I did. I was at a limited level of awareness. At this level of awareness, it doesn't work for me anymore to just let that go, to just normalize that. So what am I going to put in place for next time? What structures do I need in my life to keep me in line? Understanding is the key. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, as they say. And so I would have someone look at both the fact that the shame and the guilt aren't their enemy, but also that they're not very helpful. And that if you buy into them, you're not really intending to change anything. You're just staying stuck in the same dynamic that created it in the first place. And especially when the stuff people have the most regret about, honestly, Julian, is like their parenting, and the fact is people do their best with their kids, almost everybody. And I always tell people who are struggling with that, I say, what happened to you in your childhood? And they tell me, and it's just a horror show. And I say, did your kids have to deal with any of that? Like, I get that they are carrying emotional wounds and maybe some of them are really struggling right now, but how much of what you went through did they deal with? Well, very little of it. I say, how old were your parents when they started to feel regret and look at their parenting and take responsibility? Like, they never did. Okay, well then you're winning. So when we get really intentional and say it's more important to me to live in a world of freedom than anything else, then the minute you say that, guilt and shame are on notice, because they just have to be put in their place. You're not going to kick them out, but someone else takes over. The authentic self takes over and says, okay, now what now? What do I need to feel? What amends do I need to make? What do I need to do? Do I need to have a ceremony? Do I need to burn some letters? Do I need to, get a tattoo? What do I need to do to complete this for myself? But really complete it so that I can move forward and start creating a future rather than reacting to a past.
And now, Daniel, excellent. This is your last question, and it's going to be like a 1-sentence thing. So
good luck with that.
Yeah. But you know what? And if you're led to go on more than that, you do as you please. But
I'm going to try to be concise.
This is your last chapter of the book, which is this interview. You have the power, the authority to create a law, and this law everyone is going to follow. So that's it. This is your chance. You've climbed up the ladder of politics. You've done all your things.
Oh my God.
Now, whatever law you make, we all got to follow it, man. So what is that law that you're going to be putting into place?
Everyone has to take one walk with someone else, really listening to them intentionally every month. And everyone has to perform the reverse function once a month. You have to take a walk with somebody and then have someone take a walk with you. We have to support each other like that to keep ourselves honest, to keep ourselves intentional. I don't know if I'd make that a law, but I'd make that a policy, and I would fund it. And I would make sure that human beings have incentive and wherewithal and the ability to walk alongside each other and support each other in staying aligned. There we go. Never mind the BG staying alive. I'm going to do my version called staying aligned.
I love that. And even though this just came up, is there anything right now that you're just highly disgusted with that you see going on in the world? Even though you gave me a lot, but it's
Yeah.
just one thing that you wish you could just completely wipe up.
I mean, yeah, it's in the realm of politics. I mean, there's so many things. Um, I've always been disgusted by the ways that imperialism pushes its propaganda on people and makes people blind to what's really going on. Um, and has people cheering for the flag or the flag of whatever our policy is. So for instance, obviously the Russian invasion of Ukraine is terrible. And I understand that people's, Ukraine flags and their bios are well meant. But what we never look at, because we never hear it from our media, is the way that we have been, that this war didn't start when Russia invaded. We've been supporting a coup in Ukraine. We've been supporting neo-Nazis in Ukraine. We've been blocking diplomatic efforts. We don't really care about the Ukrainians. This is, US does not do things in the world out of the values that it professes. So that makes me sad. What pisses me off? Well, this probably just speaks to how many hours a day I spend on Twitter when I totally shouldn't. But just the discourse is so toxic around so many things, and on every side, I see people just talking in bad faith, being cruel, being closed-minded, not hearing what the other side is saying. Especially in this culture war thing, woke versus anti-woke. I just look at all of it, and the word woke used to mean something useful. Like in the days of the Black Panthers or thereabouts, that word meant be aware, stay woke. It was a warning to each other as you passed each other on the street or on the stoop. Don't sleep. Be mindful of the fuckery that abounds. You know what I'm saying? Keep your mind sharp. That's what it meant. It didn't mean have the right morals or have this or like speak this way or have this or that opinion. It was about awareness and consciousness. Now, yeah, a social justice consciousness is very good, but it's become a cultural badge. It's become an affect. And then on the other side, you got the anti-wokesters who just react to that, and they see the excesses of that, and they see the stuff, and they have their prejudices. So they see people bending rules of sexual and gender self-expression, and they're threatened by that, and they get, because they're insecure or they're bigoted or whatever. And now they're making fun of anti-woke people and missing the point that maybe there are some overcorrections going on, and maybe there are some people being silly with it, but the intention for many, many people is to make the world a kinder place. And these conservatives just stuff their compassion down, and they're cruel and rejecting, and then they just create more backlash and pushback on the other side, and it goes back and forth, and it's just this echo chamber of insanity, and no one's talking sense, and no one's listening, and no one's being thoughtful. And of course, if I stay on there too long, then neither am I, because then I just take up my own position, So the ways that technology and current popular culture, stuff pisses me off. Like I saw a Tampax ad today on Twitter that was trending, and it said something like, they're up in your DMs, but we're in them. We are not the same. And everything about that pissed me off. Number one, the co-optation of the like sassy language. I mean, I know I've used some black derived phraseology in here, but I'm not doing an advertisement, we are not the same, blah, 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 for a Tampax ad. And then also like this sexualized for a hygienic product that like 11-year-old girls are using, you know, and then we wonder why conservatives are all up in arms about groomers and shit, when we're just kind of flaunting and laughing at this and being like, ha, if you don't laugh at this, you're uncool. No, it's gross. It's just immature and gross. It's puerile, you know? So I don't know. That's because, but it's just like, there's a great Hungarian expression: when something is so false that not even the opposite is true. And I feel like I'm seeing that a lot, and I don't know what to do about it. And I feel like, well, maybe I start a podcast, but does the world really need one more socio-political podcast? I think maybe the solution is just to log off and just keep creating and really connecting with each other. Because actually, if I was to speak to any of these people in real life, we could have a conversation. I'm sure of it. I've talked to all kinds of people, but online we'd become the worst, most superficial, most inauthentic versions of ourselves. And then we get thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of likes for it. And that reinforces it. And that's just the whole system in a nutshell, really.
We're done, Daniel. That's it. We ended just right there. System in a nutshell. And then I will piggyback and just come up here. Daniel, there's going to be a lot of people who want to be lifelong supporters of you, want to see, okay, what is this crazy individual going to be up to next? What's going on with his life? How can they, number one, what's the best place for people to buy the book? Number two, the best place for people just to connect with you moving forward?
The best place to buy the book is at your local independent non-corporate bookstore. But if you have to order it from Amazon, I won't tell anybody. Or Audible for the audiobook. It's called The Myth of Normal: Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture by Gabor Maté, with yours truly, Daniel Maté. If you want to check out my mental chiropractic work and talk to me, I can do a free 15-minute call just to see if it's a fit for you, or just go ahead and book a walk. That's at walkwithdaniel.com. If you want to stay up on my musical theater stuff, my website for that is danielmate.com, M-A-T-E. And my social media is a good place to hear me pop off about whatever and share videos of me playing Steely Dan and rapping to Nas or whatever I'm into, or lip syncing, really. And that is Daniel B. Maté on Instagram and on Twitter. And yeah, keep your ears peeled, because there's a bunch of stuff coming in the new year that I'm excited about. And yeah, I'm excited to be connecting with people. And as long as I keep my feet on the ground, as this thing scales up, as they say, I think I'll be able to keep doing this for a while, because it's fun and I get to meet awesome people like you.